Thank you. We're up to Massive Marzutra, on top of 88B. 88B. We think Hashem that's able to entire every day. So we're learning, we should have some English. We're learning the Nishmas, Zav Golda Basbar Benjamin, and Sanozev Ben Benzian. And for whoever needs her for Shlema, Abdullah Ben Sarah.
Benjamin Yosef Naftali.
Benjamin Ben Yosef Naftali. For Shlema.
You put on the recording.
Yeah, I put it on, thank you. Yeah, very good. Okay, so the last thing that we learned, and the general concept that we're learning is Machlekes, Rabbi Yanai, and Rabbi Yochanan, when produce is chayiv and meiser. Yanai says when it comes into the house, Rabbi Yochanan says even when it comes into the courtyard. And then we had a discussion of how do we get into when produce is chayiv and meiser, because we're discussing about when a worker is allowed to eat from the field. So obviously he can't eat once it's chayiv and meiser, because he's not separating the meiser. He's not eating a fancy meal here. He's just eating while he's working. So, and included in this was a discussion about if a worker also has the negative, if the employer has a negative prohibition of not to muzzle his animal, if that applies to the worker as well. And we said that it does not, but we're going to see soon that possibly it does. We'll see. Masa Marzutra. Marzutra has a question. Izu Goran and the Meisters. When is something considered a finished product regarding that it's obligation to remove the tithes? So, Bikishun, if we're dealing with cucumbers or squashes, gourds, Mishayifkasu, when the flower falls off, I guess it has like the fruit gets so big that the flower at the end of it falls off. That's considered that it's ripe enough now that it's going to be chayiv and meiser. We learned before that it's when you take it into the house. That's going to be our question. Ravasi says, Mishayinatel pika shalem. When the flower is removed, that means not only if it happens on its own, but even if you come along and remove it by hand, it's going to be chayiv and meiser. My love, is it not? Mishayifkasu afilu basada. That even if you remove it in the field, it's going to be chayiv and meiser, and not when it comes into the house. It's a kasha both on Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says in the courtyard, this could be even in the field, the removal of the flower, or if it falls off. Gemara says, "Loi, it's not what it means. Mishayifkasu b'bayis. When the flower falls off after you've taken it into the house, taken it into the house, that's when it's chayiv and meiser, and then you wait for the flower to fall off. Yachi. That's the case, Mishayifkasu, why are you saying when the flower falls off? Ad sheyifkasu mi bailei. Until the flower falls off. If you need two criteria, then it has to say not only this, but even you have to wait until that. If you need two criteria. So here the criteria would be into the house, and then even into the house, you still need to wait a little bit extra, but until the flower falls off. But if it's just the flower falls off, then we'll say, okay, from when the flower falls off. But if it's into the house, and then you have to wait after it's enough, and you say until, not from when, but until the flower falls off. That's what you'd have to emphasize that. The Gemara says, "Itana ad sheyifkasu," if we would say that until the flower falls off, Havamina ad the gemar the pikusayo. That would be until the last of the flowers fall off. Kamashmon mishayifkasu michi askuli pikusayo. It means from when the beginning of the flowers fall off. If we would say until, you would think until means until the end. Until could mean throughout, but because it says Misha Yifkasu from when, that means even from when it starts.
Before they mentioned like that someone was like on a trip and that they would fix the portion that they had at home. Does that work here with the worker? Like, could the worker eat some?
See, we're using the Meiser as a way of gauging when it's a finished product and when it's too much. It's not directly the laws of Meiser. The laws of Meiser is teaching me when he's allowed to eat. Right? If he's working, he's not allowed to eat. Even if the owner is going to take the Meiser, he wouldn't be allowed to eat. Because it's at that stage where it's chayav in Meiser. It's not the prohibition of Meiser that's stopping it. There's a monetary prohibition that's stopping it, which is gauged by the obligation of Meiser. The tires were taken or not. No, that has to do with the gauge of when it's a finished product. I mean, it's a right product that's not chayav in Meiser, the worker is allowed to eat. If it's a right product that's already chayav in Meiser, the worker is not allowed to eat. Now, for two reasons. One, because Meiser wasn't taken, and one because the allowance of a worker eating while he's working is only in that interim stage. If the produce is if the owner took the tithe, so then that doesn't mean that the other part is allowed, the monetary aspect. Maybe it is, but it doesn't. I mean, we didn't learn that.
And the case that the person was able to benefit and then like tithe the rest, like what he had at home.
There's problems with that. There's certain situations where we make an allowance where a person can take Meiser even though he's not there. That's it's exceptions. Yeah. Okay, another question. Masa Marzutra. Yes, a second question. We're in the second Masa Marzutra. Masa Marzutra Breder of Nachman. This is maybe a different Marzutra, I don't know. It says, Geranai L'maiser L'chayev Olav Mishum Tevel. When is something a finished product that he'd be obligated, that he's eating produce that's untithed? Mishut Tigmar Malachta. When the produce is complete. Be'ez Gemar Malachta, and when is the produce complete? Well, Malachas Hachnasasan. It's the work of bringing it into something. My love does not mean even if you bring it into something in the field. Now, what do you mean bringing it into in the field? It would mean to put it into a big pile. That would mean when you pile it up, that's when it would be chayiv. Even if you didn't bring it into the house, it's a kasha and Rabbi Yanai that says you need to bring it into the house. Kasha and Rabbi Yechanan, based on our assumption of what the meaning of hachnasasan is, it's a kasha and Rabbi Yechanan that says you have to bring it into the courtyard. When it says lie, you're asking a question based on an assumption. What it really means is hachnasasan l'bayis. It means bring it into the house, Gemar Malachta, and that's when it's good, which is exactly what Rabbi Yanai says. And according to Rabbi Yechanan, we could just translate that it means into the courtyard. And if you want, you can say another teretz. Okay. Yeah, we can answer another teretz, which resolves some issues. If you go like this, you can say that Rabbi Yanai, when he said that you have to bring produce into the house to make it chayiv and meiser, he was referring specifically to olives and grapes, which are not piled up outside, but are brought into the house. But grain, which is piled up outside, that would be chayiv and meiser even outside. So this resolves a lot of the questions. This answer on this, because we know that when it's something chayiv and meiser, when you do miruach on the top, when you smooth off the top, and then we're learning from Biana, you have to bring it into the house. It says, yeah, there's different types of things. There's grain, which you have to smooth off the top of the silo, and then you have the fruits, the grapes, and the olives. That if you're putting it into the press, then that's a different story. But if you bring it into the house to eat, then it's from when you bring it into the house. Okay. Now we go to a more general topic. We say Ashkechan Adam b'mechuber v'shar b'talash. We have one halacha that tells us that you have to allow a worker, to eat while he's picking fruits. We also have another pasuk that says that you have to allow an animal to eat when it's threshing. Now, threshing is after it's harvested. After you cut the grain, you put it on the ground, you put a board on top of it, and you let the animal stamp on it and crush it. Now, when it's crushing it, so there's grain flying around over there, so you have to allow it to eat that grain while it's threshing.
Threshing soften up the soil, or is that?
No, that's plow it. The threshing is the breaking the husks so that the seeds can fall out and taking the peels off. Well, we have one halacha that a person is allowed to eat while the food is attached to when the produce is attached to the ground. And we have another halacha that says that a man is not allowed to muzzle his animal while it's threshing. Adam betalash minalan. How do you know that a man should be also allowed to eat if the food is already removed from the ground, similar to the animal? That says, well, we can learn kal v'chaymer mishar. We can learn it as a kal v'chaymer from the animal. If the animal is allowed to eat, or you're not allowed to muzzle it, so to the same thing should apply to a human. If an animal is not allowed to eat while is not allowed. There's no negative prohibition that to muzzle an animal while the produce is attached to the ground. But there's a negative prohibition that he's not allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground, which is talking about the threshing. Adam, a person, that he can eat while it's attached to the ground, for sure should be allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground. If the animal that we're not so nice to, but nevertheless we let him eat when it's detached to the human that we're very nice to, for sure we should allow him to eat when it's detached from the ground. The Gemara says, how can you make that comparison and to create a kal v'chaymer? One second. We don't have a negative prohibition on man that you're not allowed to muzzle him. We never said that. We only said that by an animal. And now you're trying to say that just like an animal is allowed to eat, so too the man is allowed to eat. One second. There's a special strictness about an animal that we don't find by man, which that is that you're not allowed to put a muzzle. We learned before up on the top that if the arrangement was that he doesn't eat, it's not a problem, which means there is no negative prohibition on a man. So Gemara says, one second, but let's create a negative prohibition that you're not allowed to muzzle a man while he's working. We can make that into a kal v'chaymer as well. If there's an animal, you're not obligated to keep animals alive, to support them with tzedakah and that type of thing. But you're not allowed to muzzle him. So a man that you're mechuyev to keep man alive with tzedakah, make sure that they survive. And it didn't shout to mitzvah al-chasimasa. Is there not a kal v'chaymer that if an animal, which we don't have to be so nice to, but nevertheless we're not allowed to muzzle it. So a human being, which we have to be nice to, for sure we should not be allowed to muzzle it. So Amar Kra, pasuk says kanaf shecha, like yourself, which is referring to the owner. Kanaf shel payal, just like the worker. Ma nafsha yim chasamti pater, af payal im chasamti pater, just like the person himself, if he is kanaf shecha kanaf shel payal. Just like the owner himself is allowed to muzzle himself when he's going to do work, so too he's allowed to muzzle his worker, like we learned on the top of the page, the last piece yesterday.
A worker just refrain from eating doesn't have that.
He doesn't actually need a physical muzzle. What it means is that you can tell him, I don't allow you.
I've read it many times.
Number 13. The Torah is more strict about requiring us to support a man than about requiring us to support an ox. And so if the Torah is strict about muzzling an ox, surely strict about muzzling a man. Good.
Makes it seem like it's more strict on men. Like it's you, like the animal is the lower one. So like if you're strict with animal, you have to be like stricter with men. I think the opposite. Like we should be more lenient with
No. It's telling you a kal v'chomer. If we're not obligated to support an ox, you don't have to give tzedakah. You see, an ox. Please support my pet, right? Charity campaign. But nevertheless, you have to support another human being, right? So, if the Torah tells you that even though you don't have to support an ox, but you're not allowed to put a muzzle on it, so for sure you should not be allowed to put a muzzle on a human. If an ox that doesn't need support, but you're not allowed to muzzle it, it's a human which does require your support. For sure, you should not be allowed to muzzle it. That's the kal v'chomer.
Yeah, that's what you're telling me. But when I read it there, it seems like it's stricter on men. Like
Which it is stricter to support a man. If it's strict to support a man, then for sure it should be strict about not muzzling a man.
And there's an actual
I
pasuk
know
about
what you're
muzzling
saying,
an
but when I
animal.
read
Yeah,
it here,
that pasuk
it
is
seems
about
like
muzzling. Read it again.
There's no pasuk we got from
you see, it says surely is as strict about Muslim.
Surely it's strict that you're not allowed to muzzle a man. They're writing it. The writing of it is not perfect because it's confusing between who's doing the muzzling. It's all talking. That whole sentence is the recipient of the muzzle. It's not talking about the person putting on the muzzle. Right? No, it was so funny. It was written a little difficult. Right. Let's see, kids. Right? When the Art Scroll first translated the Gemara, so someone made a comment. They said, "No, it's not a good thing because now the Hasidim are going to need to learn English."
Men are walking around with muscles.
When the little kids,
No, there's some people walking around with these muscles.
oh, with the masks,
Yeah,
yeah. The professor's saying that they weren't allowed to put masks on us for 2 years. You're allowed to take it off when you wanted to eat. That's the potato chips on the plane. Okay.
When you're eating on the plane, there's no cold. I want to make sure this is so.
Okay.
Does that mean the wife can't?
Okay. So we have now a pasuk that tells me that the pasuk tells me that there's no prohibition of putting of stopping a worker from eating. In other words, you can make that arrangement. Either monetarily, you say that I'm going to pay you extra, but you're not allowed to work. But definitely, you can make that arrangement, or however you make it. So how do we know? Basically, now if we lose the kal v'chomer, because animal is stricter than man, because animal you're not allowed to muzzle, a man you are allowed to muzzle. So how do you know that a person is allowed to eat while he's working with produce that's removed from the ground, just like the animal? We don't have the kal v'chomer anymore. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "Kama kama beis pamim." It says twice in the verse, "Kama." It's not referring, if it's not necessary, if it's not needed to teach that a man is allowed to eat when the produce is still attached to the ground, so then it's coming to teach me that a man can eat when the produce is detached from the ground. This is called im einay inyan. If it's not necessary for this, it will teach me about something that I would need it for, even though it's not exactly what it's talking about. Rabami says, Adam b'talash leitzarach kra. You don't need a pasuk to tell me that a man can eat while the produce is separated from the ground. Ksiv kisava b'ker meyacha. The pasuk says when a person enters into his friend's vineyard, what is he doing in there? He's not necessarily coming to pick the grapes. Is it not talking about that they hired him to carry things on his shoulders? He's transporting the grapes. So even though he's transporting, he's allowed to eat. That means that even though it's detached from the ground, he's allowed to eat. The Torah says he's allowed to eat. So we're talking about even not the picker of the grapes, but the mover of the grapes. When they're transported, is also allowed to eat, which means that a person is allowed to eat from things that are removed.
The halacha from produce that falls from a tree, you're not allowed to bring it in to your private domain.
Yes,
You
but
just let
so things you have to
people-
leave it for the poor, right?
Not necessarily, can it be like workers can gather or just anyone?
It means the poor. Yeah, poor is someone that either doesn't have a certain amount of money or doesn't have a steady income. That would be the poor.
But if a hired worker comes.
Hired
in, say
worker with
that's
a
not
steady
okay.
income is not poor. Even though he doesn't have a lot of, even though he doesn't have a savings account.
This is different because it's actually on the field.
This is because he's working. He's allowed to. The worker is allowed to eat while he's working. Okay. Now we go the opposite direction. We were going that where do we see that a man is allowed to eat from produce that's detached from the ground, which we find by an animal that you're not allowed to muzzle it. Where do we see that by a man? Well, we got it from two possible sources, either Kama, or we got it from the pasuk of Kisava B'ker Miyach, according to Rabami. Now we go the other way. Now we say Sharbim Mechumer Minole. How do you know that an animal is allowed to eat even when the produce is attached to the ground? We only know that only when it's detached from the ground, when it's on the threshing floor. It's already detached. So we would say Kal V'chaimer Miyadam. We'll learn it from a Kal V'chaimer from man. Go exactly the other direction. These Kal V'chaimers, it's like the Kal V'chaimer of the Ganav. Remember the Ganav's Kal V'chaimer? The Ganav made a Kal V'chaimer why he's allowed to steal. He says, if you're not allowed to put your hand into my pocket to take out my wallet, but I am, so for sure, where you're allowed to put your hand, for sure I'm allowed. If I'm allowed to where you're not, right? So then for sure, where you are, for sure I am. So in your own pocket, for sure I should be allowed to take it. Right? That's so that's how we're working.
The call that we've used is if a weak man can lift 10 pounds and a strong man can surely lift 10 pounds.
Right.
But you can't reverse it and say if a strong man can lift 10 pounds, a weak man can lift 10 pounds. Isn't that what the Gemara is doing here?
Yeah, so the Gemara, but it's finding a stringency in each. It's finding the one nuance, and then we ask on the Kal V'chaimer that other problem.
Uh-huh.
You know. So it goes like this. Ma adam she'enoicha b'talash. Whereas for a man who's not allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground, now that doesn't mean that he's really not allowed to eat, but we didn't have it written clearly that you're not allowed to muzzle him. We don't have a negative prohibition, I guess. We don't have a clear prohibition. We don't have a clear allowance in the Torah that he's allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground. We just learned it out of two sources, but it doesn't say, it's not written clearly. But nevertheless, he's allowed to eat when it's attached to the ground. Sure, so the ox, is allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground. It's written clearly. You're not allowed to muzzle him when he's threshing. Then for sure you should be allowed to eat when it's attached to the ground. If man, it doesn't say clearly, but he's allowed to eat when talish. So the animal that it says clearly, for sure should be allowed to eat when it's animal where it says by talish that he's allowed to. So for sure he's allowed to eat when it's attached. It says mal adam shkenat mitzvah l'achiyese. How can you ask? How can you make a kal v'chaimer like that? That if an animal is allowed to, if a man is allowed to eat, for sure an animal is when it's attached. Making kal v'chaimer like as if an animal we have to support more. It says that's so not true. When But when it comes to keeping a human alive, there's a clear verses that tell us that you have to support him to remain alive with tzedakah. And then by an ox, you don't have those verses to support it to stay alive. So therefore, you can't make a kal v'chomer like that. The Gemara says, well, maybe let's learn that you have to support an ox. The Yeshar mitzvah l'achis kal v'chomer should make a kal v'chomer that tells you that you do have to keep animals alive. Ma adam sheyat mitzvah al chasimasa yat mitzvah l'achis. When it comes to a man, it doesn't say that you're not allowed to muzzle him, but nevertheless you have to keep him alive. So an ox, which it says clearly you're not allowed to muzzle him. So for sure you should have to keep him alive with tzedakah. We can extrapolate, right? That if you have to keep an animal alive, that if you're not allowed to muzzle an animal, then we should have charity campaigns for animals. Makra, pasuk says, your brother should live with you. It says your brother, it doesn't say an ox. Yeah.
But there is, I think that we should do that first.
Yeah, you have to feed your animals first. Yeah.
What comes first, payment or?
I think the animal comes first for food, and the human comes first for drink.
Oh.
You can drink before your animal drinks, but you can't eat before your animal eats. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. There's each of these halacha. That's the uniqueness that you can't do comparison. That's what we're saying. Okay. See, like the Gemara says, where should you say Atachin Antano? Where should you say Havdalah in davening? Which paragraph should you say it? The Gemara says you say it in Das. Havdalah means to make distinctions. The comparisons that everyone can make. It's very easy to make comparison. Say, oh, in politics or whatever in the news, they say, oh, these people are like the Nazis. Comparison, you can make any comparison you want. The question is, can you make distinctions? And say, what are you talking about? How can you compare them to? There's no comparison. The distinctions, the das, is to be able to show the contrast, not the compare. Everything is like, oh, this food is like poison. It's like I know it says das, but anyway, it's probably been in Chassidus more. But anyway, that's what we're doing over here. We're saying that. Oh, let's make a comparison. A kal v'chomer, this, and the Gemara says, no. You have to see the contrast, not the. Okay. Right. So, Bella Sharba Mechub Minalan said, how do you know that an animal is allowed to eat when the food is still attached to the ground? Amakra, Reyacha Beis Pamim, it says, we come into your friends. Now, why does it have to say your friend twice? Meaning, if it's not necessary for a man, because that we know, so it will apply it to an animal. This is again that concept of Inyan. If I have a limud, but if I don't have what it's directly referring to, anything to apply this derivation, so then I'll apply it to something, even though that's something different. Ravina says, I don't need a pasuk for these things, the two things that we've been discussing on this page, that a man should be allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground, and that an animal should be allowed to eat when it's attached to the ground. Because I have a pasuk that says, you're not allowed to muzzle an animal when it's threshing. Michti. Let's see this. Everything, it's not only the ox. When it says that you're not allowed to muzzle an ox, it's not obviously not referring just to the ox, it's referring to any animal. When it says that your animals need to rest on Shabbos, it says sharcha v'chamarcha. What is shar? Doesn't mean specifically your ox. It means all your animals, whatever animals that you have. So if that's the case, so why does it have to write the ox at all? Why does it need to say it? What the reason why it's saying it is it wants to do a comparison between man to animal and animal to man, which goes like this. Just like the person, the human, is allowed to eat when it's attached to the ground. That's what we said, right? When you come into your friend's vineyard. Also, the animal is allowed to eat when it's attached to the ground. Just like the animal that could get muzzled is allowed to eat. Nevertheless, when it's detached from the ground, also the person that puts on the muzzle, he's allowed to eat. The worker now is allowed to eat when it's detached from the ground. So he learns it from the word shar. It's coming to teach me that I have to do this comparison between man and animal. Okay. Taner Rabbanan. We're going to get into like Sachshem Shor B'Dishay. What is Dishay? Dishay is the threshing floor. It says Dayesh. What day is the bris? Friday. Are you going to go in?
Yeah.
Where are you going to stay?
The
Okay.
question is, where's Jake?
Okay. Tanrabanan Dayesh. I'm now on 89A. And it's probably like a new piece. There's probably a squiggle there.
164.
You can tell the page number?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Did you know that? That the Quran in the Hebrew has the page number to the English? Is that correct? Is it the right number? Oh, okay. You taught us something. The page, the Hebrew Quran on the bottom tells you what page to look at for the English. Okay, Tanur Rabbanan was taught in the Brisa Dayesh. Ma Dayesh Miuchad, when threshing. Just like this threshing is davar shegidule karka, something that grows from the ground. That's what you have to thresh. And the worker is allowed to eat from it. That's what we understood. Afkal shegidule karka, also anything that grows from the ground. The worker is allowed to eat from while he's doing the work. This excludes someone that milks an animal. That milk doesn't come directly from the ground. Mechabet says he curdles the milk. This probably means he makes butter or those basic cheeses, the soft cheeses. Megavin and someone that makes the hard cheeses. Puts it into like a mold or something. Which doesn't grow from the ground. The worker cannot eat. Can you imagine the workers in the ice cream thing? They cannot let it take scoops while they're. That's going to be too hard. When you get a job in the ice cream store, I bet they let you eat as much as you want. No? Get a job in Baskin Robbins. Do they let you eat? They don't let you eat? If they catch you licking, oh my God. Everyone, the cameras.
In restaurants, sometimes they do it.
Oh my gosh. That's got to be tough. Can't eat at all.
Yeah, but it's not, they're not gonna have like the best things.
Okay. So that would apply to this. That would be based on this, that you don't have to let the workers eat. In the coffee shop, in the coffee shop, are they in Starbucks? Are workers allowed to drink coffee?
I would think maybe like once a shift, have a coffee. It'll probably help them work better also.
Let's say they have to drink the coffee, right? Make sure that it's good. Anyway, okay. So the Gemara says, okay, you're learning from Dayesh. Lamali, why do I need the drasha from Dayesh? I know that a worker is allowed to eat and grows from the ground and not allowed to eat what doesn't grow from the ground. From the verse that says, when you come into your friend's vineyard, I have another source. They don't need to learn it from the threshing, the animal threshing. Well, it's necessary to teach us from the Dayesh. Salkadai the famina couldn't you mind highlights if come Rabbis called Balikaimel Rabbis Namid Lavdulikarknino. When we said standing, kama means standing. We said that it's referring to standing grain or anything that grows. But we could have learned that it's referring to other things as well. Kama, anything that's standing up. I don't know. It doesn't have to be actually standing as a stalk grows from the ground. Anything that's standing there, even if it doesn't grow from the ground. So Kamash Malan, so Daesh is telling me that no, it needs to be something that grows from the ground. Tani Yidach, I have another brisa. Says Daesh, the threshing. Ma Daesh Milcha, just as what's threshed is unique. Davar Shebeshas Kamar Malacha Pa'aleichel Bai, that is something that it's the end, it's the time of when it's right. The worker is allowed to eat from it. So to anything that at the time that it's ripe, the worker is allowed to eat from it. This is coming to say that someone that's weeding out garlic and onions, which what they would do is they would grow a lot of them, and then they would have to pick out in between every other one to allow them to spread. I think they would do this because they didn't know which one was going to take root or something. But then they would have to pick out the certain ones to allow the big ones to grow larger.
What do they do with ones they picked out?
Well, they would probably eat the ones that they took out, but it wasn't the finished product of the field. It was, it was just the smaller ones that they would take out and throw it into a box and sell it for cheaper. Whatever. Right. So what they would do is they would pull out every other one to allow them to grow bigger. They do that to the jackfruit trees. They want to, if they have these competitions of how big they grow the jackfruits, they cut all of them off except for one.
It's on one tree though.
One tree, yeah.
We're talking about planting 100 radishes so they could get whatever.
Right.
Thinning. So it's practice
thinning. Right. They do it to the pumpkins. In New England, they have these pumpkin challenges. Who can grow the biggest pumpkin? Okay. But because that's not the end of the work, so the worker is not allowed to eat those little guys because that's not the finished product. It is the finished product of them, but it's not the finished product of the field. So the Gemara says, Lamali, why do I need to learn it from Daesh? I learn it from that you're not allowed to put it into your basket. And the Gemara said before that you're only allowed to eat if you're putting it into the owner's basket, which means it's the finished product. There's two levels of finished. I say the word finished, not finished for Meiser, but finished as ripe. So then that's when you're allowed to eat. The Gemara is answering Afagav the Kamashlif Ketini Beni Alimi that we're talking about over here, where it really is still the finished product because you are putting these smaller onions into the owner's basket. So for the owner's basket, you're not allowed to put it into your own basket, which means that you're not allowed to put it into your basket, but you're allowed to eat it. But because it's Daesh, because it's not the finished product entirely of the field, so then I'm not allowed to even eat it as well. If I would only have one verse, it would look like I'm allowed to eat it. The second verse tells me that I'm not allowed to eat it. I want to eat straight onions. Alarm just went off in the yeshiva. I had a message over here.
Fire alarm?
Yeah, all right. We always talk about doing a fire alarm because there's a dormitory during the night. To a fire drill to do that. But it looks like this was not planned. At least they didn't tell me about it. Okay, I hope everyone's okay. So, all right, that'll get them up. So, Tanya Idach, there's another brisa. Daesh, it says the threshing floor, Daesh miyucha, just like the threshing floor is unique. It's not ready for Meiser. If it's not ready for Meiser, then the worker is allowed to eat it. So to anything that's not the finished product from Meiser, the worker is allowed to eat. Someone that's separating dates or figs that got stuck together, that they're already chayiv and meiser, but that they gave this person this job to do that, he is not allowed to eat from it because it's already chayiv and meiser. But tiny 1 second, you have another brayse that says exactly the opposite. That someone that is separating the dates and the figs that are stuck together, because they get gooey and you have to break them apart. It would actually, when they would get hard, because I think the honey on it would crystallize, make it hard. They would have to use a utensil to break it apart. So it says that he is allowed to eat from it. Rav Papa says Kitani, when he's allowed to eat from it, that's b'tuchlani. Those are the smaller dates that weren't really finished ripening. So they didn't ripen on the tree. They would put them in the sun or whatever to ripen over there. So those, because they're not really the finished product, those are not chayiv and meiser yet. So that's why you're allowed to eat from it. So we have a brayse that says you are allowed to. That's talking about a specific type, which is not chayiv and meiser. Tani Yidach, we have another brayse. It says dayesh. We're going to this pasuk of Isachim Sharbedisha. We're learning from the dayesh. It says the threshing floor, ma dayesh michadavish le'nigmal ma'achde lachala. It's not ready to take challah from it, and therefore therefore the worker should be allowed to eat it. So to anything that's not ready for challah, the worker is allowed to eat from it. Yatsa halosh is coming to exclude that the worker should be allowed to eat. Someone that needs the dough. Oh, I'm sorry. It's coming to exclude what he's not allowed to eat. The person that needs the dough is not allowed to eat some of the dough. Don't eat too much, get a stomachache. So he's not allowed to eat. He's not allowed to eat anything at all. Makate is the guy that smooths out the dough with water, putting like water on the top of it. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Cold water or hot water. And the baker, he's not allowed to eat from it, because it's already time for challah. You have to separate a portion of the dough to give it to the Kohen, the 148th or 124th, depending on if it's a homeowner or a baker. Where it says, of course you can't eat from it. Why do you have to tell me that you have to take challah? You have to take meiser already. For sure you can't eat. So the Gemara answers like kasha, b'chutzlar, it's a skin like a meiser. We're talking about outside the land of Israel. There is no meiser. There's only challah. It says, really? So then if the outside the land of Israel, if you don't have meiser, you don't have challah either. We take challah outside Israel. That's just a rabbinic, right? From Taitz. Yeah, thank you. Really, we're talking about in the land of Israel. Like kasha, it's not a question. It's talking about the first 14 years when they entered into the land of Israel. The verse that speaks about challah is different than all the other verses that talk about the laws of entering into the land. The verse says, it says Bibayachem or whatever, it has a different pasuk, instead of Kisavayo. Kisavayo means when you enter into the land, which that would be including after you've already conquered and divided. But Bibayachem means when you enter into the land, means before you conquered and divided. So you're chayev in challah, but you're not chayev in meiser. It's talking about this would be a very old brisa, which is going back to the days of Yeshua. In those first 14 years. Yeah, that's really amazing. This could be a source. Yeah, no, but we know that the brises were passed down to us the halachas of the prices were passed down to us from Moshe. It's the oral Torah passed down, but then we find them that they're usually like associated with the discussion that's going on in the Mishnah time. But every once in a while you find like one thing that was only relevant for the first few years that they came into the land of Israel, which tells you again that it was an early. The only thing is here it says Midi Meiser Kagarim. 1 second, you're making it look like it's the Meiser itself that tells you that you're not allowed to eat from it. It's not the Meiser that tells you that. It's the Gemar Malacha Kagarim. Why? The reason why you're not allowed to eat from it is because it's the finished product. Now the way to tell if it's a finished product is when it's Chayav and Meiser. But it's not the Meiser. So if there's no obligation of Meiser, you're still not allowed to eat from it. Like you were asking, but let's say the owner took the Meiser. Ela Maravina Karach Vatani. Rather, what you have to do is like this. You have to put it together. Dayesh, when it says in the pasuk of the Dreshing Klama, Dayesh Mechadav Nigma Machtal Meiser Ulachala Payalech Bay. This, like the threshing floor, is not the finished product for Meiser or Chala. That's when the worker is allowed to eat. What we just did is we dropped from it that distinction between it's Chayav and Chala, but not Chayav and Meiser. We dropped that because we join it both together. It's Chayav and Chala and Meiser. The worker is not allowed to eat from it. Okay, I guess we should leave it here. Okay, we'll stop at the bottom of page test.